if you watch this channel, you know that my focus is on a comprehensive approach to stress management. But the word stress can be subjective in many ways. Different things happen to different people and they react to those things differently. So stress is one of those things that can be very individual. Although we have many definitions and many parameters when we talk about stress, it can, to a large degree, be individual. What stresses one person out may not stress out somebody else. In today's episode, I'd like to talk to you about the science of stress. Basically, what goes on when our bodies and our minds experience stress. Although stress can sometimes be a little more difficult to define simply because of differences in individual experiences, we all know stress when we see it, and we all know stress when we experience it. To one degree or another, when we experience stress, our body is trying to decide what to do. You've all heard about the fight or flight response. So in that scenario, what we're suggesting, what scientists are suggesting, is that when we face stress, a stressful situation, our choices are to either flee, to get out of the situation, remove ourselves one way or another, or to fight the situation if leaving is not an option or it's not a choice that we choose to make. There's another option, and it's to hide. Sometimes fleeing is not a really successful option, neither is fighting, but hiding may be one way of surviving a stressful situation. So where for the longest time we had fight or flight, we also have the option to hide. And of course, when it comes to the response that we have towards stress, both physically and psychologically, our body and our mind have to figure out how to support our decision, whether it's our decision to run away, to fight, or to hide. All of those may require some specific things. If you choose to run away, you have to be able to be fast to get away out of the situation. You may have to be simply resourceful to get out of a situation that may be less dangerous in terms of being physically attacked, but maybe the harm takes on a different form. If we decide to stay and fight, we may have to worry about having a physical strength that matches that choice, or another kind of strength, whether it's a strength of argument or anything else that would allow us to fulfill our desired outcome in terms of making that choice. And of course, if we choose to hide, we have to have certain abilities in order to hide well and hide effectively so that that choice serves us well. So whenever we face a stressful situation, we have to make a choice in terms of what to do about it, how to deal with it. Do we get out of there? Do we stay and fight? Or do we hide? Most of you, if not all of you, have heard all about cortisol, or have heard something about cortisol being the stress hormone. And while cortisol gets a lot of attention, of course, that's not the only hormone that is involved in whatever actions are required whenever we deal with stress. But cortisol is the big one, and it's one that gets a lot of attention. So basically, when we do face a stressful situation, hormones such as cortisol are excreted in order for us to deal with the situation in the best way we can. What's also important to remember is that these hormones, whether it's cortisol or any other hormones that are related to stress, have an effect on many systems within our body. So it's not just affecting the muscles, let's say, giving us the ability to flee or to fight. It affects our cardiovascular system, it affects our immunity, it affects our metabolism. So it's important to remember that whether it's cortisol or any other hormone that's associated with stress, they will have some kind of an effect on many of the systems in our bodies. Our bodies were designed to respond to short-term stressors, in that when we face a stressful situation, hormones are released, and those hormones are intended to help us to survive, to help us to get through a situation in the most successful way possible. But that design is mostly focused on short-term stress situations. But in today's world, we often face what is known as chronic stress between work and home and everything else in our lives. All the to-do lists, all the responsibilities tend to heighten the stress level for many people throughout the day. So an acute response to acute stressors is no longer the norm. Oftentimes, our bodies continue to respond to stress on a prolonged basis, sometimes on an ongoing basis, simply because of the lives that we lead and the levels of stress that we have. And while these hormones and responses brought on by stressful situations are perfectly fine in terms of how they affect us short term for short bursts of stress, when we are affected by stress on an ongoing, prolonged, or repeated basis, where these hormonal responses, let's say, for example, happen on a near constant basis or a frequent basis, now we're looking at how our bodies and our minds are affected in terms of long-term exposure. This is why it's so important to learn how to manage stress effectively. We live in such a busy, competitive world that it's quite common for people to be stressed out or to face stressors on a regular basis throughout the day. We need to have the appropriate tools to deal with that effectively so that we are not constantly in a state of stress or in a state of responding to stress physically and psychologically. It's also important that every individual learns to listen to his or her body and learns to recognize what the effects of stress are. These effects could be physical, they could be emotional, they could be mental. So whether that means changes in appetite, changes in sleep, inability to concentrate, being easily irritable, the list could be endless, but it's up to you as an individual to be able to recognize the kinds of symptoms, the kinds of things that are associated with you feeling stress, being stressed out, the effects of stress. Only then can you proactively deal with these things. If you don't know that something is part of your experience, if you don't recognize it, if you don't notice it, and if you're not able to associate it with stress, it'll make it that much more difficult for you to deal with. So pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind, your moods, and your thoughts, because they can have many clues for you in terms of the stressors in your life. When you recognize and better understand what your stress responses are like, so whether you all of a sudden cannot concentrate or cannot sleep or sleep too much or reach for alcohol or drugs or are more irritable, whatever the case may be for you, once you're able to understand what stress does to you, then you can seek out the most appropriate and therefore the most effective tools to help you to combat those effects of stress, to help you to manage those stressors so that you're not constantly exposed to them. The bottom line is that we are empowered through knowledge, information and awareness. And much of that is self-awareness, not just awareness of what's going on around us, but also self-awareness. It is only then, when we are armed with information and understanding, can we address a situation such as stress in this case in such a way that is effective and actually helpful to you. So remember, pay attention to what you do, how you respond, and what happens to you when you're faced with different stressors and different stressful situations, so that you can then pick and choose the appropriate tools from your stress management toolbox so that your responses are most effective. If you'd like to learn more about a comprehensive approach to stress management, check out the links below.